Jake Morrison wiped the sweat from his forehead as he stepped out of the research shuttle. The twin suns of Kepler 442b burned bright in the orange sky, making the air shimmer with heat. He had been studying the ocean life on this frontier planet for 3 months now, and today felt like any other day. "The water samples from Sector 7 are ready for testing," said Lisa Grant, his research partner. She handed him a sealed container filled with murky water. "I found some interesting microorganisms near the coral formations." Jake nodded and took the container. They had set up their temporary lab near a small lake, about 5 miles from the main colony. The planet was still being explored, and new discoveries happened every week. Most of the time, they were harmless bacteria or small fish. Sometimes they found something bigger. As they walked toward their equipment, Jake heard a strange sound. It was weak and high-pitched, like a kitten crying for help. He stopped walking and listened carefully. "Do you hear that?" he asked Lisa. She paused and tilted her head. "Hear what?" The sound came again, softer this time. Jake followed the noise toward a cluster of large rocks near the water's edge. Behind the rocks, he found something that made his heart stop. Metal wreckage was scattered across the ground. It looked like a small spacecraft had crashed here maybe weeks ago. The metal was black and twisted, still showing scorch marks from the impact. But that was not what caught Jake's attention. Curled up against a piece of the wreckage was a small creature, no bigger than a house cat. It had dark green scales that shimmered in the sunlight. Its body was thin from hunger, and Jake could see its ribs through the loose skin. The creature's eyes were closed, and it was breathing very slowly. "Oh my God," Lisa whispered behind him. "Is that what I think it is?" Jake moved closer to get a better look. The creature had 4 legs, a long tail, and small claws on its feet. Its head was shaped like a reptile with a short snout and tiny teeth. Even though it was just a baby, Jake recognized the species immediately. It was a Vorthak. "Jake, we need to leave right now," Lisa said, grabbing his arm. "That thing is dangerous." Jake knew she was right to be afraid. Every person in the galaxy knew about the Vorthak. They were the most feared predators in known space. Adult Vorthak stood 8 feet tall and could crush a human skull with their bare hands. Their claws could cut through steel, and their bite force could break starship armor. They had been at war with the galaxy for over 200 years. But this was not an adult. This was a baby, and it was dying. "It's just a cub," Jake said softly. "Look at it. It can barely breathe." "I don't care," Lisa replied, her voice shaking. "Adult Vorthak kill everything they see. Even the babies are probably deadly. We should report this to Captain Brooks and let the colonial forces handle it." Jake knelt down next to the creature. Its breathing was getting weaker. He could see that it had not eaten in days, maybe weeks. Its scales were dull and its body was dehydrated. Without help, it would be dead in a few hours. "It's going to die. If we don't do something," he said. "Good," Lisa snapped. "One less monster to worry about." Jake looked at her with surprise. Lisa was usually kind to all living things. She had spent her career studying and protecting marine life. But fear was making her say things she did not really mean. The cub made another weak crying sound. Its eyes opened slightly, showing bright yellow pupils. For a moment, it looked directly at Jake. There was no anger or aggression in those eyes, only pain and confusion. Jake had made his decision. "I'm taking it back to the lab," he said, reaching toward the cub. "Jake, no!" Lisa stepped back. "You don't know what you're doing. This violates every safety protocol we have. The Galactic Council has strict laws about contact with predator species." "The Galactic Council isn't here," Jake replied. "And this is not a predator. It's a scared, hungry baby." The cub did not resist when Jake carefully picked it up. It was surprisingly light, probably weighing only 10 pounds. Its scales felt warm and smooth, like leather that had been sitting in the sun. The creature made a small chirping sound and pressed against Jake's chest. "See?" Jake said. "It's not trying to hurt me." Lisa followed them back to the lab, but she kept her distance. She was already thinking about how to explain this to their supervisors. Bringing a Vorthak to their research station was insane. If the colonial authorities found out, Jake would be arrested. If the Vorthak Empire found out, they might attack the entire planet. Back at the lab, Jake cleared a space on one of the work tables. He gently placed the cub down and began examining it. The creature was weak but did not seem to have any serious injuries. It was just hungry and dehydrated. "What are you going to feed it?" Lisa asked. "Vorthak are carnivores. They eat meat." "No," Jake replied. "We have protein synthesizers here. I can make something that might work." He programmed the machine to create a mixture of proteins and nutrients similar to what young mammals needed. The result was a thick, gray paste that smelled like fish. Jake put a small amount on his finger and offered it to the cub. The creature sniffed carefully, then began to lick the food from Jake's finger. It ate slowly at first, then with more enthusiasm as its strength returned. "I can't believe this is happening," Lisa muttered, but Jake noticed she was taking pictures with her scanner. "What are you going to call it?" she asked. Jake watched the cub eat. Its tiny claws caught the light as it reached for more food. "Razor," he said. "I'll call him Razor." Over the next few hours, Razor grew stronger. He drank water eagerly and ate 3 more servings of the protein paste. By evening, he was sitting up and looking around the lab with curious eyes. "We need to contact Captain Brooks," Lisa said. "He needs to know about this." Jake nodded. He knew they could not keep this secret forever. But for now, he wanted to give Razor a chance to recover. Tomorrow, they would face whatever consequences came from his decision to save a creature that the entire galaxy considered a monster. Tonight, he just wanted to help a lost baby find its strength again. 3 weeks had passed since Jake found Razor, and the cub had grown remarkably. He was now the size of a medium dog. His scales had regained their bright green color, and his eyes sparkled with intelligence. Jake spent every free moment with him, watching his behavior and learning his habits. "He's nothing like the reports say Vorthak should be," Jake told Lisa as they watched Razor play with a rubber ball in the corner of the lab. The cub would pounce on the ball, grab it with his claws, then toss it in the air and chase it around. Lisa had to admit Jake was right. She had read every scientific paper about Vorthak behavior, and none of them mentioned playfulness. Adult. Vorthak were described as cold, calculating killers who showed no emotion except rage. But Razor was curious about everything, gentle with his claws, and seemed to enjoy their company. "Maybe young Vorthak are different," she said, making notes on her tablet. "Perhaps their aggressive nature develops as they mature. Or maybe," Jake suggested, "their aggressive nature is learned, not born." This was a dangerous idea. For 200 years, the galaxy had been at war with the Vorthak Empire. Every species knew that Vorthak were natural-born killers who could not be reasoned with or changed. But watching Razor, Jake began to wonder if everyone was wrong. Razor had learned to recognize his name. When Jake called to him, the cub would come running on his 4 legs, making happy chirping sounds. He had also learned to be gentle around the humans. His claws were already sharp enough to cut skin, but he was careful not to scratch them when he played. "Look at this," Jake said, pointing to his arm. Yesterday he accidentally scratched me while we were playing, but this morning he came over and licked the spot where the scratch was. It's like he was saying sorry. That's impossible, Lisa replied. Vorthak don't have empathy. Every study shows they're incapable of feeling guilt or remorse. Every study was done on adult Vorthak in combat situations, Jake pointed out. No one has ever studied a cub that was raised with care and kindness. Lisa had to admit this was true. She watched Razor carefully as he brought the ball over to Jake and dropped it at his feet. The cub's tail wagged slightly and he made encouraging chirping sounds, clearly wanting Jake to throw the ball for him. His behavior is definitely not what we expected, she said, taking more pictures. I've been documenting everything. This could change how we understand their species. Jake threw the ball across the lab, and Razor bounded after it happily. As the cub played, Jake noticed something else unusual. Razor seemed to understand when they were sad or upset. If Lisa looked tired, he would come over and sit quietly next to her. If Jake was frustrated with his work, Razor would bring him the ball or make soft, comforting sounds. He's reading our emotions, Jake realized. He can tell how we're feeling and responds to it. That level of emotional intelligence is remarkable, Lisa agreed. Most predator species don't show this kind of social awareness, but their peaceful days were about to end. That afternoon, Captain Ryan Brooks arrived at their research station with 2 colonial security officers. His face was serious, and Jake knew immediately that their secret was out. Dr. Morrison, Captain Brooks said formally, I understand you. Have an unauthorized life form in your possession. Jake stood up slowly. Razor sensed the tension and moved to stand beside him, looking up at the strangers with cautious eyes. That depends on how you define unauthorized, Jake replied. I define it as keeping a member of a hostile alien species without permission from Colonial Command, Brooks said. That creature is a Vorthak. Do you understand how dangerous this situation is? His name is Razor, Jake said calmly, and he's not dangerous. He's just a baby who needed help. One of the security officers reached for his weapon when he saw Razor, but the cub only tilted his head curiously. There was no sign of aggression or threat in his posture. I've been watching this creature for weeks, Brooks continued. Our surveillance. Drones picked up thermal signatures that didn't match known wildlife. When we investigated, we discovered what you've been hiding. And what exactly have I been hiding? Jake asked. A potential weapon, Brooks replied. The Vorthak Empire might be using this cub as some kind of scout or spy, or they might come looking for it, which would put our entire colony in danger. Lisa stepped forward with her tablet. Captain, with all due respect, we've been documenting Razor's behavior extensively. He shows no signs of programmed behavior or hidden programming. He's just a normal baby animal. Normal? Brooks laughed bitterly. There's nothing normal about a Vorthak. These creatures have destroyed entire worlds. They've killed millions of people across the galaxy. Adult Vorthak have done those things, Jake corrected. This cub has never hurt anyone. In fact, he's shown remarkable gentleness and intelligence. As if responding to his name, Razor walked over to Captain Brooks and sat down politely. He looked up at the captain with bright, curious eyes and made a soft, questioning sound. The captain stepped back instinctively, but Razor didn't move. He simply sat there, waiting to see if this new person might be friendly. See, Jake said, he's not a monster. He's a child who wants to learn and play and be loved. That doesn't matter, Brooks replied, though his voice was less certain than before. I have orders to contact the Galactic Council immediately. They'll want to study this creature, and they'll probably want to question you about how you found it. You mean they'll want to take him away? Jake said. For the safety of everyone, yes. Jake looked down at Razor, who was now looking between him and the captain with growing anxiety. The cub could sense that something was wrong, and he moved closer to Jake for protection. I won't let that happen, Jake said quietly. Dr. Morrison, you don't have a choice in this matter, Brooks replied. I'm ordering you to surrender the creature immediately. No. The word hung in the air like a challenge. Jake knelt down and gently picked up Razor, who immediately calmed down and nestled against his chest. I found him dying and alone, Jake said. I saved his life, and he trusts me. I won't betray that trust by handing him over to people who see him as nothing more than a thing to be studied and dissected. This is not a debate, Brooks said angrily. You're endangering this entire colony with your reckless behavior. The only thing I'm endangering is the galaxy's prejudice against a species they've never tried to understand, Jake replied. Brooks signaled to his security officers, but before they could move, alarms began blaring throughout the research station. Emergency lights flashed red, and a computer voice announced, Incoming vessels detected. Unknown configuration. All personnel, prepare for possible hostile contact. Through the windows, they could see ships descending from orbit. The vessels were black and angular, with weapon ports that gleamed in the sunlight. Everyone in the room recognized the design immediately. Vorthak warships. They've come for him, Brooks said, his face pale with fear. Razor pressed closer to Jake, sensing the danger that was approaching. But instead of becoming aggressive or trying to escape, he looked up at Jake with complete trust, as if he believed his human friend would protect him no matter what. And Jake knew that he would try, even if it cost him everything. The Vorthak ships landed just outside the colony with ground-shaking thuds. Jake watched through the lab window as massive figures emerged from the vessels. Even from a distance, he could see they were twice the size of humans, with the same reptilian features as Razor, but built for war. Their scales were darker, almost black, and they moved with deadly precision. We need to evacuate immediately, Captain Brooks said into his communicator. All civilian personnel to the emergency shelters. But Jake wasn't listening to Brooks anymore. He was watching Razor's reaction to seeing his own kind for the first time. The cub had climbed onto a chair to look out the window, and his body language showed fear, not recognition or joy. Razor's scales had darkened slightly, and he was making small whimpering sounds. He's afraid of them, Jake realized out loud. What? Lisa asked, moving to stand beside him. Look at him, Jake said. If these were his people coming to rescue him, wouldn't he be excited? But he's terrified. Lisa observed Razor carefully. The cub was indeed showing all the signs of fear, flattened posture, rapid breathing, and he kept looking back at Jake as if asking for protection. Maybe he doesn't remember them, she suggested. He was very young when we found him. Or maybe, Jake said quietly, he remembers them too well. Before anyone could respond, the lab's communication system crackled to life. A deep, harsh voice spoke in heavily accented English. Humans of this colony, we are Warlord Crexton of the Vorthak Empire. We know you have taken something that belongs to us. Return our property immediately, and your deaths will be swift. Captain Brooks activated the response system. This is Captain Brooks of the Colonial Defense Force. We are willing to negotiate the return of the Vorthak cub under proper diplomatic protocols. The alien voice laughed, a sound like grinding metal. There will be no negotiations. You have... corrupted our young with your weakness. This insult to our species cannot be forgiven." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. The way Crexthon spoke about Razor, calling him property, and talking about corruption, made Jake understand something terrible. The Vorthak weren't here to rescue a lost child. They were here to punish what they saw as contamination. "We're not giving him back," Jake said firmly. "Dr. Morrison, be reasonable," Brooks pleaded. "We can't fight the Vorthak Empire. If we cooperate, maybe they'll spare the colony." "You don't understand," Jake replied, picking up Razor, who immediately clung to him. "They're not here to save him. They're here to destroy him because he's been corrupted by human kindness." Lisa had been monitoring the communication channels, and her face had gone pale. "Jake, there's more," she said. "I'm picking up signals from ships arriving from other sectors. It's not just the Vorthak coming." She showed him the scanner readings. Ships from the Zelnari Collective, the Etherian Commonwealth, and the Hegemony Mechanicus were all approaching the planet. Word had spread throughout the galaxy about the human who had tamed a Vorthak. "This is becoming a diplomatic incident," Brooks said, sweat beading on his forehead. "Every major power in the galaxy is getting involved." The communication system activated again, but this time it was a different voice, cold and mechanical. "This is Coordinator Prime of the Hegemony, Mechanicus. We claim salvage rights to the Vorthak specimen and demand immediate surrender for analysis and processing." Another voice cut in, this one high and musical. "The Etherian Commonwealth objects, the human-Vorthak bond, represents a unique psychological phenomenon that requires our specialized study." Then came a fourth voice, buzzing like angry insects. "The Zelnari Collective offers 1 million standard credits for immediate transfer of the specimen to our bioweapons division." Jake felt sick. Everyone was talking about Razor like he was an object to be bought, sold, or studied. No one seemed to care that he was a living being with thoughts and feelings. "I won't let any of you have him," Jake said into the communicator, even though he knew it was hopeless. "Dr. Morrison?" came yet another voice, this one speaking with crisp authority. "This is Ambassador Vale of the Galactic Council. You are in violation of 17 different interspecies contact protocols. Surrender the Vorthak immediately, and you will receive a fair trial." Jake looked down at Razor, who was looking back, up at him with complete trust. The cub didn't understand what all the voices meant, but he understood that Jake was upset, and he made soft, comforting sounds. "Your fair trial would end with Razor being dissected in some laboratory," Jake said. "The creature's welfare is not your concern," Ambassador Vale replied. "Your reckless actions have created a galaxy-wide crisis. Multiple empires are mobilizing their fleets. If this situation escalates, it could lead to war. Then maybe the galaxy needs to ask itself why everyone is so eager to destroy or exploit one innocent child." Jake shot back. Captain Brooks was receiving updates from his security team. "Dr. Morrison, we have Vorthak warriors surrounding the research station. They're demanding immediate access." Through the window, Jake could see the massive aliens taking positions around the building. Their weapons were enormous, designed to tear through starship armor. Against such firepower, the research station's walls might as well be made of paper. But something strange was happening. Other ships had landed, and representatives from different species were setting up their own positions. The Etherians had deployed shimmering energy barriers, the Zelnari had released swarms of defensive drones, and the hegemony forces had activated heavy combat mechs. "They're not working together," Lisa observed. "Each faction wants Razor for themselves, and they're willing to fight each other to get him." Jake realized she was right. What had started as a rescue mission had become a standoff between galactic superpowers, and in the center of it all was one small cub who just wanted to play with his ball. "This is insane," Jake muttered. "They're ready to start a war over a baby." "Not just any baby," Lisa said softly. "A baby that proves everything they believe about the Vorthak might be wrong." Jake understood then why everyone was so desperate to get their hands on Razor. If a Vorthak could be raised to be gentle and loving, it challenged the fundamental assumptions that justified 2 centuries of war. It suggested that the Vorthak Empire's reputation for cruelty might not be natural, but learned. And if that was true, then everything the galaxy thought it knew about good and evil, about civilization and barbarism, might need to be reconsidered. "We need to get out of here," Jake said, looking around the lab for anything they could use. "Where can we go?" Lisa asked. "The entire planet is surrounded by warships." "I don't know," Jake admitted, "but I won't let them turn Razor into a political symbol or a weapon." Outside, the various alien factions continued to position themselves for conflict. Jake could hear the whining of charging weapons and the mechanical sounds of deploying equipment. Soon, this peaceful research station would become a battlefield, and somewhere in the middle of it all, Jake held a small creature who had never hurt anyone, whose only crime was being born into a species that the galaxy feared and hated. But Jake had seen something in Razor that no one else wanted to acknowledge. The possibility that anyone, even a Vorthak, could choose to be different than what others expected them to be. The tension outside was growing by the hour. Jake could see weapons being aimed in multiple directions as the different alien factions prepared for battle. Inside the research station, Captain Brooks was receiving constant updates from his security. "Team, sir, the Vorthak forces are demanding immediate entry," reported a security officer over the radio. "They're giving us 10 more minutes before they breach the facility." "And the other factions?" Brooks asked. "They're all taking defensive positions. If shooting starts, this place will be ground zero for a 4-way battle." Jake held Razor closer, as the cub sensed the growing danger. The young Vorthak had stopped playing and was now staying close to Jake's side, occasionally looking toward the windows with worried yellow eyes. "We can't stay here," Jake said to Lisa. "When the fighting starts, Razor will be caught in the middle." "Where can we go?" Lisa asked. "The entire colony is surrounded." Before Jake could answer, there was a knock at the lab's back door. Everyone froze. The back door led to the maintenance tunnels that connected the research station to the colony's water treatment facility. "Don't answer it," Brooks whispered, drawing his sidearm. But a familiar voice called through the door. "Jake, it's Ben Carter. I'm here with Mia Torres. We're here to help." Jake recognized the voices. Ben worked at the colony's supply depot, and Mia was an engineer who maintained the underground systems. They were both good people who had been friendly to Jake since he arrived on the planet. Jake opened the door carefully. Ben and Mia slipped inside quickly, both carrying large backpacks and wearing dark clothing. "We know what's happening," Ben said quietly. "Half the colony thinks you're crazy, but the other half thinks what you did was right. We're here to get you out." "How?" Jake asked. Mia pulled out a tablet showing the colony's underground tunnel system. "These maintenance tunnels connect to the old mining shafts in the hills. The aliens don't know about them because they're not on any official maps. The mining shafts lead to a network of caves," Ben added. "We can hide there until this mess gets sorted out." "You don't understand," Captain Brooks interrupted. "This isn't just a local problem anymore. The entire galaxy is watching. If Dr. Morrison runs, it will only make things worse. And if he stays, that little guy gets turned into a lab experiment," Ben replied, nodding toward Razor. "We've all seen how he plays with the kids in the colony. He's not a monster." Jake was surprised to hear this. He didn't know that Razor had been seen by other colonists. "Oh, yes," Mia said, noticing his expression. "Word gets around. People have been watching from a distance. Most of the children think he's amazing. It's only the adults who are scared." A new voice came over the communication system, speaking in the harsh Vorthak language. Lisa quickly activated the translation program. "Warlord Krexthon is ordering his forces to prepare for assault," she said. "They're going to breach the facility in 5 minutes." "That settles it," Jake said, making his decision. "We're leaving." He grabbed his emergency pack and gently placed Razor inside a modified carrying case they had made for him. The cub fit comfortably inside, with air holes and a soft lining. Razor didn't resist. He trusted Jake completely. "I'm coming with you," Lisa said, grabbing her research data. "This is madness," Brooks protested. "You're making this situation worse for everyone." "The situation is already as bad as it can get," Jake replied. "At least this way, Razor has a chance." Ben led them through the back door into the maintenance tunnel. The underground passage was narrow and dimly lit, but it was better than facing the weapons outside. They moved quickly and quietly, with Mia checking her tablet to make sure they were going the right way. Behind them, they could hear the sounds of the research station being breached. Heavy footsteps echoed through the building, followed by angry voices in multiple alien languages. "They'll figure out we're gone soon enough," Ben whispered. "We need to move fast." The tunnel led to a series of larger passages that had been carved out during the planet's early mining operations. The air was cooler here, and Jake could hear water dripping somewhere in the darkness. "How much farther?" he asked. "About 2 miles, Mia replied. "The caves are in a section of the hills that's too unstable for heavy vehicles. They'll have to come after us on foot." As they walked, Jake opened the carrying case to check on Razor. The cub was looking around with bright, curious eyes, apparently enjoying this new adventure. He made a soft chirping sound when he saw Jake's face. "He's not even scared," Lisa observed. "He trusts us completely." "That's what makes this so important," Jake said. "He's everything the galaxy says a Vorthak can't be. Trusting, gentle, loving. If they can see that, maybe things can change." They reached the caves just as the sun was setting. The entrance was hidden behind a cluster of large rocks, and inside, the caves opened into a surprisingly large cavern. Ben and Mia had prepared well. They had already brought in supplies, sleeping bags, and a portable power generator. "This should keep us hidden for a while," Ben said, setting up a camping light. Jake released Razor from the carrying case, and the cub immediately began exploring the cave with excited curiosity. He sniffed at the rock formations, chased echoes of his own chirping sounds, and eventually found a comfortable spot to sit and watch the humans set up camp. "Look at him," Mia said with a smile. "He's having fun." Lisa was monitoring the communications channels on her tablet. "The aliens are searching the research station," she reported. "They're arguing about where we might have gone." "Do they know about the tunnels?" Jake asked. "Not yet, but it won't take them long to figure it out." Mia's right, though. They can't bring their heavy equipment into these hills. The ground is too unstable. As night fell, they sat around their small camp while Razor played with the rubber ball that Jake had brought along. The cub had learned to be quieter in the cave, as if he understood they were hiding. "What's the plan?" Lisa asked. "We can't stay here forever." "I don't know," Jake admitted. "I just know I couldn't let them take him." "You did the right thing," Ben said. "Everyone in the colony has been talking about this. Some people are scared, but others are starting to ask questions. What kind of questions? Jake asked. Like why a baby Vorthak acts nothing like what we've been told adult Vorthak are like, Mia replied. And why every alien faction is so desperate to get their hands on him. Jake looked over at Razor, who had curled up next to the camp light and was dozing peacefully. In sleep, the cub looked even more like an ordinary baby animal, vulnerable, innocent, and completely harmless. Because he proves they've been wrong, Jake said quietly. For 200 years, the galaxy has believed that Vorthak are born evil, but Razor shows that they're born just like any other child, ready to learn love or hate, depending on how they're treated. That's a dangerous idea, Lisa said. It challenges everything the galactic powers have built their policies on. Maybe it's time those policies were challenged, Jake replied. Outside the cave, they could hear the distant sounds of search parties moving through the hills. Bright lights swept across the landscape as the various alien factions looked for any sign of their hiding place. But inside the cave, a human sat quietly beside a sleeping Vorthak cub, both of them surrounded by friends who believed that love was stronger than fear, and that even the most unlikely friendships could change the galaxy. Jake woke up to find Razor doing something he had never seen before. The young Vorthak was arranging small stones in careful patterns on the cave floor, using his claws to place each rock with precise movements. The patterns looked almost like symbols or letters. "Lisa, come look at this," Jake whispered, not wanting to disturb Razor's concentration. Lisa crawled over from her sleeping bag and watched in amazement. Razor had created several rows of stone arrangements, each one different but clearly deliberate. The cub stepped back to examine his work, tilted his head as if thinking, then adjusted one of the stones slightly. "Is he making art?" Lisa asked. "Quietly, or trying to communicate," Jake replied. "Look at how organized it is. Those aren't random patterns. They had been hiding in the caves for 5 days now." Each day, Razor showed new behaviors that surprised them. Yesterday, he had started making different chirping sounds that seemed to have specific meanings. He made one sound when he was hungry, another when he wanted to play, and a third when he was warning them about approaching search parties. "He's learning faster than any young animal should," Lisa said, taking pictures of the stone patterns. "His cognitive development is remarkable." Ben and Mia had gone back to the colony to gather more supplies and information. When they returned, that evening they brought disturbing news. "The situation is getting worse," Ben reported. "More alien ships arrive every day. The colony is basically under siege now." "But there's something else," Mia added, pulling out an old data tablet. "I found this in the abandoned mining office. It's archaeological survey data from when they first explored these caves." She showed them images of ancient cave paintings deep in the tunnel system. The paintings showed scenes of Vorthak-like creatures, but they were different from the modern Vorthak warriors everyone knew. These ancient Vorthak were shown working together, creating art, and caring for their young. "There are more caves deeper in the system," Mia explained. "Some of them have intact artifacts that are thousands of years old." Jake felt a chill of excitement. "Can you take us there?" "It's dangerous," Mia warned. "The tunnels are unstable, and some areas are flooded. But yes, I can guide us." The next morning, they packed light supplies and ventured deeper into the cave system. Razor seemed to sense they were going somewhere important and stayed close to Jake, making soft, questioning sounds. The deeper caves were spectacular. Ancient Vorthak artwork covered the walls, showing scenes of a civilization very different from the warlike empire everyone knew. These Vorthak were shown as scholars, artists, and peaceful farmers. In many pictures, adult Vorthak were gently caring for cubs that looked exactly like Razor. "This changes everything," Lisa breathed, documenting every image. The Vorthak weren't always warriors. In one chamber, they found stone tablets covered with Vorthak writing. Lisa used her translation software to decode some of the text. "It's a historical record," she said, her voice growing more excited as she read. "According to this, the Vorthak were once a peaceful species known for their art and philosophy." "What happened to them?" Jake asked. Lisa continued translating. "There was an invasion. Another species called the Devourers came from outside the galaxy. They destroyed Vorthak worlds and killed their young. The survivors were forced to become warriors just to survive." Jake looked at Razor, who was examining the cave paintings with obvious interest. The cub seemed drawn to images of other young Vorthak, making soft sounds as if he recognized something familiar. "The Devourers specifically targeted Vorthak children," Lisa continued reading. "They believed that if they could eliminate the young, they could prevent the Vorthak from ever recovering their numbers. So the Vorthak became what they needed to become to protect their species," Ben realized. "They turned themselves into the most feared warriors in the galaxy. But in doing so, they had to suppress everything that made them vulnerable," Jake added. "Their art, their gentleness, their love for their children." Mia had found another chamber with more recent markings. "Look at this," she called. "These writings are only a few hundred years old." The newer tablets told a different story. They described how young Vorthak were taken from their parents at birth and raised in military compounds. The natural gentleness and curiosity were beaten out of them through harsh training. Those who couldn't adapt to the warrior lifestyle were considered defective and eliminated. That's why Razor was abandoned, Jake realized with horror. His ship wasn't shot down. They threw him away because he was too gentle to become a warrior. Lisa's translation confirmed his suspicion. The tablet described how weak offspring were regularly disposed of on remote worlds, far from Vorthak space where their failure couldn't shame their families. "They've been destroying their own children for centuries," Lisa said, her voice full of sadness. Jake knelt down beside Razor, who was still studying the ancient artwork. The cub looked up at him with bright, trusting eyes, completely unaware of the tragic history his people had endured. "You're not broken," Jake told him softly. "You're what your people used to be before the galaxy forced them to become something else." As they prepared to return to their hideout, Razor did something that made everyone stop and stare. He had found some loose clay in the cave floor and was shaping it with his claws. Slowly and carefully, he created a small sculpture that looked like the ancient Vorthak figures in the cave paintings. "He recognizes his own heritage," Lisa whispered. "Somehow he knows this is what his people once were." When they got back to their camp, they found Ben's communication equipment receiving messages from around the galaxy. Word of Jake's actions had spread beyond the military and political leaders. Regular citizens from dozens of species were following the story. "People are asking questions," Ben reported. "They want to know why a Vorthak cub is acting so differently from what they've been told." Some of the messages were supportive. Citizens of various species were demanding their governments find a peaceful solution. Others were calling Jake a fool who had endangered everyone. But all of them were talking about Razor. And that meant people were thinking about things they had never questioned before. "The Vorthak government has issued a statement," Lisa said, reading from another message. "They're claiming that Razor is a genetic defect that doesn't represent their species." But we know better now, Jake said, looking at his stone sculpture. We know he represents what they all used to be. That night, as they sat around their small camp, Razor brought Jake his stone patterns again. But this time he had arranged them differently. The stones formed shapes that looked like the cave paintings, Vorthak adults and children together, peaceful and happy. He's trying to tell us something, Jake realized. Razor chirped softly and pushed one of the stone arrangements toward Jake. It showed a large Vorthak and a small one standing together, just like in the ancient artwork. Family, Jake said, understanding. You're trying to show me what family is supposed to look like. Razor chirped again and pressed against Jake's side, making it clear that as far as he was concerned, Jake was his family now. In the distance, they could hear the search party still looking for them, but Jake felt a strange sense of hope. They had discovered something that could change everything. Proof that the Vorthak's warlike nature wasn't natural, but a response to centuries of trauma and survival. If the galaxy could see what Jake had learned, maybe there was a chance for peace. Maybe it wasn't too late for the Vorthak to remember who they used to be, and maybe one small cub named Razor could help them find their way back. The morning sky was filled with more ships than Jake had ever seen. Through the cave entrance, he could count at least 50 vessels of different designs orbiting the planet. The peaceful frontier world had become the center of galactic attention. It's getting worse out there, Ben said, returning from a scouting trip to the colony. Warlord Krexthan has arrived personally with a massive fleet, but that's not the strangest part. What do you mean? Jake asked, checking on Razor, who was playing quietly with his stone arrangements. There are protests, Ben replied. On multiple worlds. People are demanding to see footage of Razor. They want to know why everyone is so afraid of one small cub. Lisa looked up from monitoring the communication channels. It's true. I'm picking up broadcasts from across the galaxy. Some governments are trying to suppress the story, but it's spreading too fast. Jake felt a mix of hope and fear. Public attention might protect Razor, but it also meant more pressure on the various factions to act quickly. There's something else, Ben continued. I overheard some of the colonial security talking. Apparently there are Vorthak ships that aren't with Krexthan's fleet. Younger Vorthak are arriving separately, and they're not following orders. What does that mean? Jake asked. It means Razor's story is causing problems inside the Vorthak Empire too, Lisa realized. If young Vorthak are questioning their society, it could tear their civilization apart. Suddenly, their communication equipment crackled with an incoming message. But this voice was different from the others they had heard. Younger and less harsh. Human called Jake Morrison, the voice said in careful English. My name is Zektar. I am young Vorthak warrior. I have seen broadcasts of small one you protect. I wish to speak with you. Jake exchanged looks with his friends. This could be a trap, Lisa warned. Or it could be an opportunity, Jake replied. He activated the transmitter. This is Jake Morrison. What do you want to discuss? I have questions. About the small one, Zektar replied. In your recordings, he shows behaviors we are taught are impossible for our kind. I wish to understand. What kind of behaviors? Jake asked carefully. Gentleness, joy, trust in other species. These things are said to be weaknesses that we removed from our bloodline generations ago, yet the small one displays them naturally. Jake could hear something in the young Vorthak's voice, confusion, maybe even hope. Razor isn't weak. He's exactly what your people were meant to be. That is impossible, Zektar said, but his voice lacked conviction. We are warriors. We have always been warriors. No, you haven't, Jake replied. We found evidence in ancient caves. Your people were artists and scholars before they were forced to become fighters. There was a long silence. Then Zektar spoke again, his voice quieter. There are others like me who have questions. Young ones who have seen your broadcasts and wonder if what we were taught is true. How many others? Jake asked. Enough that Warlord Crexton has ordered us confined to quarters. He fears we will be contaminated by human weakness. Lisa gestured frantically at Jake, pointing to her scanner. Multiple ships are breaking formation, she whispered. Some of the Vorthak. Vessels are moving away from the main fleet. Zektar, Jake said into the transmitter. Are those your ships separating from Crexthon's fleet? Yes, came the reply. We will not participate in the destruction of the small one. If he represents our true nature, then killing him would be killing part of ourselves. This was what Jake had hoped for but never dared to expect. Razor's simple existence was causing the Vorthak to question everything they believed about themselves. But their conversation was interrupted by angry voices on other channels. Crexthon was shouting orders in the Vorthak language, while representatives from other species demanded action. The situation is destabilizing rapidly, Lisa reported. The different factions are starting to move against each other. Through the cave entrance, they could see energy beams flashing in the sky as ships began exchanging fire. The standoff was turning into an actual battle. We need to get deeper into the caves, Mia said urgently. If they start using heavy weapons, these outer chambers won't be safe. As they gathered their supplies, Razor sensed the danger and stayed close to Jake. The cub's scales had darkened with stress, but he wasn't showing aggression, only concern for his human family. They moved deeper into the cave system, guided by Mia's knowledge of the tunnels. Behind them, they could hear the rumbling of explosions as the battle intensified above ground. This is exactly what I was trying to prevent, Jake said as they hurried through the passages. I never wanted Razor to become the cause of a war. You're not the cause, Ben replied. The war was already there, hidden under centuries of fear and misunderstanding. Razor just exposed it. They reached a deep chamber filled with the ancient Vorthak artwork. Here, surrounded by images of what the Vorthak had once been, they set up their emergency camp and tried to monitor what was happening on the surface. The communication channels were chaos. Multiple species were fighting over control of the planet's airspace. But most concerning were the intercepted Vorthak transmissions that Lisa was translating. Crexthon is ordering his forces to begin orbital bombardment, she said with growing alarm. He's willing to destroy the entire planet rather than let Razor fall into enemy hands. But his own people are down here too, Jake protested. He considers them traitors now, Lisa replied. According to these transmissions, any Vorthak who refuses to eliminate Razor is no longer considered part of the Empire. Jake looked at Razor, who was sitting quietly beside him, completely unaware that his existence had split an entire civilization. The cub was examining the cave paintings with the same curious intelligence he showed toward everything. There has to be another way, Jake said desperately. The communication equipment crackled again, and Zektar's voice came through, now urgent and frightened. Jake Morrison, can you hear me? Warlord Crexthon is coming for you personally. He has left his ship and is tracking you through the cave system. How is that possible? Ben asked. Vorthak have enhanced senses, Lisa explained. He can probably track Razor's scent even through the rock. How long do we have? Jake asked into the transmitter. Not long, Zektar replied. His hunting party is already in the upper tunnels. But Jake Morrison, there is something you must know. I am coming too, with others who believe as I do. We will try to reach you first." "Why?" Jake asked. "Because if the small one can be gentle and still be Vorthak, then maybe we can be something other than warriors. Maybe we can remember what we once were." The sound of heavy footsteps echoed through the cave system, coming from multiple directions. Both Krexthan's hunting party and Zektar's rebels were racing through the darkness toward their hiding place. Jake knelt down beside Razor and gently picked him up. The cub looked at him with complete trust, making soft, comforting sounds as if he were trying to reassure Jake instead of the other way around. "Whatever happens," Jake said quietly, "I want you to know that meeting you has been the greatest privilege of my life." Razor chirped softly and nuzzled against Jake's chest, as if to say that the feeling was mutual. In the distance, the footsteps were getting closer, and soon Jake would come face to face with the consequences of his decision to save one abandoned cub. But looking at the ancient artwork surrounding them, images of what the Vorthak had once been and could be again, he knew he had made the right choice. Some things were worth fighting for, even if the odds seemed impossible. The first to arrive was Warlord Krexthan. Jake heard the massive footsteps before he saw the Vorthak leader emerge from the tunnel entrance. Krexthan was enormous, even by Vorthak standards, standing nearly 9 feet tall with battle-scarred black scales. His yellow eyes glowed in the dim light as he surveyed the chamber filled with ancient artwork. "So this is where you hide, human," Krexthan said, his voice like grinding stone. "Surrounded by the weakness of our forgotten past." Jake stood slowly, keeping Razor behind him. The cub had grown considerably over the past weeks, and was now the size of a large dog. But he still looked tiny compared to the massive warrior. "This isn't weakness," Jake replied, gesturing to the cave paintings. "This is what your people were before they were forced to become killers." Krexthan's gaze fell on Razor, and his expression became even more hostile. "That abomination should have been destroyed the moment it failed its first combat assessment. Instead, you have filled its mind with your human poison." "What poison?" Jake asked. "Love? Kindness? The ability to trust?" "Yes," Krexthan snarled. "All of those things make us vulnerable. They make us weak." To Jake's surprise, Razor stepped out from behind him. The young Vorthak looked up at Krexthan without fear, tilting his head with the same curious expression he used when meeting new people. "See how it looks at me?" Krexthan said with disgust. "It should cower or attack. Instead, it shows interest. This is what happens when our young are corrupted by contact with inferior species." But something unexpected happened. Razor began making soft, chirping sounds, not the aggressive growls that adult Vorthak used for communication, but the gentle noises he had developed while living with Jake. The sounds were clearly an attempt to communicate peacefully. Krexthan stepped back as if he had been struck. "What did you teach it to do?" "I didn't teach him anything," Jake said. "He figured out how to communicate on his own. He's trying to talk to you." "Impossible." "Vorthak, do not talk. We command, we threaten, we roar our dominance. We do not chirp like nestlings." Razor continued making his gentle sounds, and then did something that shocked everyone in the chamber. He began arranging stones on the cave floor in the same patterns he had been creating for days. But this time, he was clearly directing the display toward Krexthan. The stone patterns showed 2 Vorthak figures, one large and one small, standing together peacefully. It was the same image from the ancient cave paintings, but created by Razor himself. He's showing you what family is supposed to look like, Jake realized. He remembers somehow, even though he's never seen it. Crexton stared at the stone arrangement, with an expression Jake couldn't read. For a moment, the massive warrior seemed less certain of himself. "This means nothing," Crexton said, but his voice lacked its earlier conviction. "Art is the luxury of those who do not face extinction. We abandoned such things because we had to." "But you didn't face extinction," Jake said. "You survived. You became the most feared warriors in the galaxy. The threat is gone, but you kept the fear." "The threat is never gone," Crexton replied. "There are always those who would destroy us if we show weakness." Jake was about to respond when more footsteps echoed through the tunnels. Zektar emerged from another passage, followed by 3 other young Vorthak. They moved cautiously, clearly awed by being in the presence of their warlord. "Zektar," Crexton growled, "I ordered you to remain with the fleet." "With respect, warlord," Zektar replied, "I could not follow that order. Not after seeing what the small one has shown us." "And what has it shown you?" Crexton demanded. Zektar looked at Razor, who was still sitting beside his stone arrangement. "That perhaps we have forgotten who we really are." "We are warriors," Crexton stated. "We have always been warriors." "No," said one of the other young Vorthak, a female named Vexara. "The ancient records in our archives speak of other things. Art, philosophy, music. We just never questioned why those things disappeared." Crexton's scales darkened with anger. "Because those things made us weak. They made us targets for species like the Devourers." "The Devourers have been extinct for 300 years, Zektar pointed out. "Yet we still raise our young as if they might attack tomorrow." Jake watched this exchange with growing hope. The young Vorthak were questioning their entire society, and Crexton was having to defend beliefs he had never examined. "Even if the Devourers are gone," Crexton said, "there are other threats. The galaxy fears us because we are strong. If we become weak again, they will destroy us." "Maybe they fear you because you've given them reason to," Jake suggested. "Maybe if you showed them what Razor has shown me, they wouldn't be afraid anymore." "And what has this creature shown you?" Crexton asked with contempt. Jake knelt down beside Razor, who immediately nuzzled against his hand. "That Vorthak are capable of love, that they can choose kindness over violence, that they can be everything the galaxy says they can't be." Razor seemed to understand the importance of the moment. He stood up and walked slowly toward Crexton, moving with careful, non-threatening steps. The massive warrior tensed, ready for an attack that never came. Instead, Razor sat down in front of Crexton and began to chirp softly. The sounds were different this time. Longer, more complex, almost like a song. And as he sang, he rearranged his stones to show more images from the cave paintings, Vorthak adults teaching their young, Vorthak creating art together, Vorthak caring for each other in times of sickness or injury, all the things their modern society had forgotten. "He's singing," Vexara whispered in amazement. "He's actually singing to us." Crexton stared down at Razor with an expression of growing confusion. This was forbidden. Song was one of the first things we eliminated from our culture." "Because it made you vulnerable?" Jake asked. "Because it made us remember what we had lost," Crexton admitted quietly. The admission hung in the air like a revelation. For the first time, the warlord had acknowledged that the Vorthak had lost something when they became warriors. Razor finished his song and looked up at Krexthon expectantly, as if waiting for a response. The massive warrior stood frozen, clearly, struggling with emotions he had been taught to suppress. "I don't know how to respond to this," Krexthon said finally. "You could try singing back," Jake suggested gently. I have forgotten how." Zektar stepped forward carefully. "Perhaps we could learn again. Together." For a long moment, the chamber was silent except for the distant sounds of battle still raging above ground. Then hesitantly, Krexthon knelt, down to Razor's level. "What would you have me do, small one?" he asked quietly. Razor chirped once and pushed one of his stone arrangements toward the warlord. It showed a large Vorthak and a small one, but this time they were both looking up at the stars together. The future, Jake realized. He's showing you the future you could choose. Krexthon looked at the stone pattern, then at the young Vorthak, around him, then finally at Jake. "And if we choose this path? If we try to become what we once were, what guarantee do we have that the galaxy will accept us?" "None," Jake admitted. "But I guarantee that if you don't try, nothing will ever change." Krexthon was quiet for a long time, studying Razor with new eyes. Finally, he made a decision that would echo through history. "Show me," he said to Razor. "Show me how to remember what we once were." And in that moment, Jake knew that everything was about to change. 6 months later, Jake stood on the observation deck of the newly established Cultural Exchange Station orbiting Kepler 442b. Through the massive windows, he could see ships from dozens of species docked at the station's multiple ports. But what amazed him most was seeing Vorthak vessels peacefully sharing space with ships from the Etherian Commonwealth and other former enemies. "Hard to believe this all started with one small cub," said Lisa, joining him at the window. She now served as the station's chief researcher, documenting the remarkable changes taking place across the galaxy. Jake smiled as he watched Razor through the window of the adjacent recreation area. The young Vorthak, now the size of a small adult, was teaching a group of young beings from various species how to create stone art. Children from the Zelnari Collective, the Etherian Commonwealth, and even young Vorthak worked together, their different forms of communication blending into a symphony of chirps, clicks, and laughter. "How many exchange students do we have now?" Jake asked. "Over 300, Lisa replied, checking her tablet. "Young Vorthak from across their empire are coming here to learn about their pre-war culture. And we have representatives from 47 different species studying Vorthak history and art." The transformation had not been easy. After Krexthon's change of heart in the caves, it had taken weeks of careful negotiation to prevent the various alien factions from destroying each other. But Razor's simple existence had planted seeds of doubt in minds across the galaxy. "Any word from the Vorthak homeworld?" Jake asked. "The latest reports are encouraging," Lisa said. "The Council of Warlords has officially recognized the cultural restoration movement. 3 provinces have already begun reintroducing art and music into their educational systems." Jake remembered the day Krexthon had made his first public transmission to the Vorthak Empire. The warlord had stood beside Razor, speaking in careful, measured tones about the need to remember their past while honoring their strength. It had been the beginning of a revolution that was still spreading through Vorthak space. "Not everyone was happy about the changes," Lisa continued. There's still a faction of traditional Vorthak who consider the reforms to be weakness, but they're being outnumbered by younger generations who want something different. Jake nodded. Change was never universal or immediate, but the fact that it was happening at all still amazed him. "Dr. Morrison," came a familiar voice behind them. Jake turned to see Zektar approaching, now wearing the insignia of a cultural ambassador rather than a warrior's armor. "The afternoon session is ready to begin." Jake had become something unprecedented in galactic history, a human Vorthak relations specialist. His role involved mediating between species that had been enemies for centuries, helping them find common ground through understanding rather than force. They walked together toward the main conference room, where representatives from multiple species had gathered to discuss expanding the exchange programs. Jake still found it surreal to see former enemies sitting at the same table, debating education policies instead of military strategies. "How is Razor adjusting to his new role?" Zektar asked as they walked. Jake looked through another window, at the recreation area, where Razor was now helping a young Etherian child arrange colored crystals in patterns similar to his stone art. "He loves it. I think he finally understands how important he is, but it hasn't changed who he is." "And who is he?" Zektar asked with genuine curiosity. "A teacher," Jake realized. "He's teaching us all that we can choose who we want to be, regardless of what others expect from us." In the conference room, Ambassador Vale of the Galactic Council was presenting the latest statistics on interspecies relations. Conflict incidents between member species have decreased by 67% since the establishment of the exchange programs, she reported. "And we've had formal peace negotiations begin between 12 previously hostile civilizations." Jake took his seat at the table, still somewhat amazed that he was now considered an important voice in galactic politics. It had started with one simple decision to save an abandoned cub and had somehow grown into something that was reshaping civilization itself. "The most remarkable change," Ambassador Vale continued, "has been in public opinion. Surveys across multiple species show that fear of the Vorthak has decreased dramatically, while curiosity about their culture has increased exponentially." Captain Brooks, who now served as the station's military liaison, added his own report. "We've had no violent incidents at any of the exchange sites. In fact, the biggest problem we face is managing the waiting lists of people who want to participate in the programs." Jake remembered the early days when Brooks had been terrified of Razor. Now the captain regularly shared meals with Vorthak visitors and had even learned some of their traditional songs. "What about the economic impact?" asked a representative. "From the Trade Federation." "Unprecedented," replied Ambassador Vale. "The cultural exchange has opened up new trade routes and partnerships that were impossible during the conflict years. The sharing of art, music, and knowledge has created entirely new industries." As the meeting continued, Jake's mind wandered to some of the specific changes he had witnessed. Vorthak artists were creating sculptures that combined their traditional techniques with styles learned from other species. Etherian philosophers were working with Vorthak scholars to explore questions about the nature of strength and gentleness. Young beings from species that had been at war for generations were forming friendships and even romantic relationships. "Dr. Morrison," Ambassador Vale said, drawing his attention back to the meeting, "would you like to share your assessment of the program's success?" Jake stood up, looking around the table at representatives from species that had once considered each other mortal enemies. 6 months ago, everyone in this room would have said that fundamental change was impossible. That species were locked into their roles as predators or prey, warriors or pacifists. He paused, thinking about Razor playing with children from across the galaxy. But we learned that identity isn't destiny, that even the most deeply held beliefs about ourselves and others can change when we're willing to look beyond our fears. "And what do you see as the future of these programs?" asked Crexthon, who now served as the Vorthak Empire's Minister of Cultural Affairs. "I see a galaxy where young beings grow up learning from each other instead of fearing each other," Jake replied. "Where diversity is seen as strength rather than threat, where the word enemy becomes as outdated as some of the ancient weapons in our museums." As the meeting concluded, Jake made his way back to the recreation area. Razor was now surrounded by a group of young beings who were listening intently as he demonstrated different artistic techniques. The sight still filled Jake with wonder. "You've done something remarkable," said a voice behind him. Jake turned to find Vexera, who now directed the Vorthak Youth Education Program. "I didn't do anything," Jake said. "Razor did it all. I just gave him the chance." "No," Vexara replied thoughtfully. "You did something that no one in the galaxy had tried before. You looked at one of us and saw potential instead of threat. You chose love over fear." Jake watched as Razor gently corrected. A young Zelnari's stone arrangement, his movements patient and encouraging. Any parent would have done the same thing. "That's exactly the point," Vexara said. "You saw him as a child who needed care, not as a monster to be feared. That simple act of compassion changed everything." As evening approached and the various species prepared for their rest cycles, Jake found himself alone with Razor in their shared quarters. The young Vorthak had grown into a remarkable individual, intelligent, artistic, and endlessly curious about the world around him. "Do you understand what you've accomplished?" Jake asked, sitting beside Razor as the cub worked on a new sculpture. Razor chirped softly and showed Jake his latest creation. It was a representation of the cultural exchange station, with tiny figures from different species working together in harmony. "Our home," Razor said in careful English. It was one of the phrases he had learned, though he still preferred his musical chirping language. "Yes," Jake agreed. "Our home, a place where everyone belongs." As Jake prepared for sleep, he reflected on how much had changed. The galaxy still faced challenges, and not everyone had embraced the new era of cooperation. But the foundation had been laid for something better than what had come before. In the months since Razor's story had spread across the galaxy, the phrase, "the Empire whispers," had taken on new meaning. Originally, it had referred to the fear that the Vorthak Empire inspired in others. Now it described the quiet conversations happening on worlds throughout known space. Conversations about change, about possibility, about the courage to be different than what others expected. The whispers spoke of a human who had adopted an abandoned predator cub and discovered that love was stronger than fear. They told of a young Vorthak who had reminded an entire species of who they used to be. They shared stories of former enemies becoming friends, of children playing together across species lines, of a galaxy learning that its greatest strength lay not in its weapons, but in its capacity for understanding. And in the quiet of the cultural exchange station, as beings from across the galaxy slept peacefully together, those whispers continued to spread. They carried with them a simple but revoluciona